Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. It's a wonderful holiday time. Welcome back to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's a great day for another session. As you can see, I'm in my own little holiday gear here. Got the ugly holiday sweater. Sporting, having some fun there, and doing some family parties and stuff like that today. Good stuff. Um, Today we're going to do a fun flashback to a session from man, maybe even a couple of years ago. So I think we're on about 100 episode 183 of Piano Tech Radio Hour, and we're going to reach back into the archives and check out one of the episodes back from the 50s. So we're just over that first year mark in our history here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. And we're going to do a session with Del Fondrick on the history of piano design. He studied it quite deeply and has a lot of interesting stuff to share. So I'm going to do an intro to the session here today, get the basics out of the way, and then we'll dive into this rebroadcast. So I will say to everyone out there in Zoom, as well as on the socials, Facebook and YouTube, we'll put a link. I'll put a link in YouTube momentarily if you'd like to join us. Let me actually copy that right now and put it in the chat here. So if you want to join us on Zoom, uh, click this link, and that'll allow you to register to check out the session today and come in the Zoom call. Feel free to chat in the chat while things are running down. And I'll do an intro here as well to the program. So, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to this program only. It's called Piano Tech Radio Hour for just $16 a month, and get direct access to each week's private Zoom call. That is this call right now, as well as the archival recordings of over 180 episodes in our member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/join PTRH. And again, that's bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. I will put that link in our Zoom chat for those of you that haven't yet but would like to join the radio hour. I'll pop that link out there on the socials as well. Just give me a moment to do that. And then just a second, I'm going to go live with our rebroadcast with Del Fondrick. So let me pull that up and we'll dive right in. Oh, we got some folks in the waiting room. Let me get them in here. Okay, awesome. Filtering in a little bit later. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. If you're just arriving, we're about to dive into the session with Del Fondrick from a few years back, a rebroadcast on piano design and its history. And so, get ready, tune in. All right, one moment here. Do the share screen. Pick that screen. We'll make sure we do the sound and the video optimization. I'll do a share and hop over there. All right, let's hit it.
So without further ado, I will say hello to our guest for today. Really good guy, and I would say a mascot of various cool things in the piano industry. His name's Del Fondrick. He's worked in piano design. He's been a consultant for various manufacturers throughout the world. And what I love about Del is he's he's one of those people that I'm just trying to spotlight him so we can see him for everyone. He's one of those folks that is really great, I think, with sort of first principles thinking, kind of like, okay, so that's how it's done, right? But why? And if I were to do it, from scratch, and I think that's why he's really, really great with design, how would I, given the result that I want, how would I change the process, or what kind of process would I build based on, first principles of how I'd like things to be. So he's come up with really interesting ideas, like how to, renew. We call it resurrecting a soundboard. He helped us with a master class on that using an epoxy, maybe kind of a counterintuitive thing. He's discovered a lot of cool stuff. So I guess I'll just launch in by saying, welcome, Dale. And what you been up to, man, since we since we last connected? You survived the pandemic, and we're really glad we're all still here. What's been like? What life been like for you?
Surviving. I think the pandemic has affected us pretty much like it has everyone else. We were being particularly cautious because with my lungs being like they are, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that if I got it, I was going to, at the very least, end up in the hospital, and I probably wouldn't have come out. So we isolated ourselves probably earlier than others and kept isolated more so than others. So that part of it has been difficult to get through. But other than that, life goes on. We're both busy. Barb's doing a lot of editing. I'm doing less piano work than I had done, although I am slowly working on the book that I hope to put out soon about soundboard repair, what we did the
Awesome.
class on.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And is it, I don't want to, isn't there some other text that you were working on? I don't want you to have to say about it, but I feel like you were working on another interesting book. Maybe you won't get there. Do you want to mention it, or is this not a topic to share?
I'm not sure which other one.
Don't you have like a kind of a set of text on piano design in general?
I have a lot of different single articles that I've written over time.
Okay.
That several people have suggested that I put into book form. I have not done that as yet, and I don't know if I will or not. I mean, it's an interesting challenge. Yeah, it's possible. Let's just say it's
no pressure.
It's a possibility.
No pressure. I mean, having talked to Mario Agrek about his whole process of putting together, his book, I know it's a complicated and grueling process to put together anything. So, yeah, no pressure on that. But I have, so people are already private messaging me some interesting questions. I've got a handful already. So let's jump in and see. First of all, the publicly posted questions. Ken Kopp, he said, can Dell talk about hybrid scales? Got anything interesting to say about that?
Well, this is a relatively recent additional tool to our set of tools that we can use to help. First of all, its most immediate application is in helping some of the really horrendous short piano scales that are out there. Basically, it started out, at least for me, it started out with Palello's wire. It's called low tensile strength wire that he's developed. I think he's having it made in Germany, but he sources it out of his facility in France. Much is said about the tensile strength properties of the wire, but for me, that is not that's not what we really hear. The wire, if you hold it in your hand and compare it to what we think of as traditional piano wire, the low tensile strength wires are much more flexible. And the scaling numbers are essentially the same in that a number 17 wire traditional wire and a low tensile wire of the same length and same diameter are going to have essentially the same tension, but the breaking strength is considerably different. The breaking strength of the low tensile strength wire is much lower. It'll break more easily. Where this wire seems to be the most effective, that's not an issue, because it's really more effective in for example, the low tenor sections of a piano. I've used it in some very, very short scales, 5 foot, 5'2", 4'10" scaling. There are some that are particularly notoriously badly designed scales, like the little short Yamahas of a couple of decades back. Pianos that we used to simply swap out the lowest, I don't recall now, 4 or 5 or 6 notes in the low tenor with bichords and to convert them over. There's some success can be had by just substituting the low tensile strength wires with, or the standard wire with low tensile strength wire. And the tone is not the same as it would be if it were a reasonably designed scale, but it is a lot less bad. I've set some of these up as direct comparisons on my string testing machine, and you can definitely hear the difference between the two types of wire. So there is something definitely happening there. A number of very good rebuilders are now incorporating these just automatically in pianos. Another application for it is as core wire particularly for monochords on short pianos, where flexibility is a real problem. It can make the low bass, the monochord section of a short piano sound a lot less bad than it otherwise would have. So yeah, I think it's something that if you're restringing pianos, it's definitely worthwhile. He has several different types, and Plola has a fairly good website set up. In fact, you don't really need to know much about scaling at all. You can use his what it's called, I think, a typogram, to feed in the lengths of the wires that you're working with, the speaking length of the wire that you're working with, and the diameter of the wire, and his typogram will tell you what type of wire should be used. Type 0, type 1, type 2, etc. So yeah, I would not restring a short piano, or even a mid-sized piano for that matter, without using some low tensile strength wire now. So everything that I've done recently has been hybrid.
I was curious, like a follow-up on that, just the types of strings and the lengths and how this all plays out. We had David Clavins of Clavins Piano give a lecture at the last online convention we did this year. Have you explored what he's doing at all? You aware much of Clavins?
A little bit. I haven't seen any of his pianos personally, but yeah, they're very interesting. I have to appreciate stretching the envelope and exploring new ideas. Whether they seem practical or not is really irrelevant in that sense. I would love to be able to go over and see and hear some of the instruments he's installed. I see a question up above about publishing and editing the book Piano Tone Building.
Mm-hmm.
That book has been out for some time, and it's available through PDG, or it's available directly from us. Just send my wife an email or a text, and we can get it out to you.
Yeah, we can put her email in the chat. Maybe. What is it? BJ Fandrick or something?
BJFondrick at hotmail.com.
Put it in there right now. Oh, make
Yeah,
sure to send that to everyone. Explain the book a little bit. That would be good.
Well,
like, tell people why you put it together and kind of what was the purpose.
The reason I put it together is there's a lot of very interesting information. I first read the book when I was just beginning to learn about pianos, and it taught me a great deal of misinformation about piano design. But it was state of the art in 1916, 1917, 18, 1919. The book is a stenographic record of the series of meetings that were held with what they called piano technicians, which these people were really industry people. They were manufacturers. They were piano builders. So yes, they were called piano technicians, but they were really industry people. And they discussed a rather wide range of topics. Unfortunately, not all of the stenographic record was kept. They took out a lot of the parts that they thought might be misleading or might be too personal, or that would be insulting, and some of the real juicy stuff, which I'd love to known what they were saying. But anyway,
did Barb just give you a copy? I've got my copy
here's
here.
The original.
Oh, this one's the artwork's better on the front.
This is. I'll show you why I was interested in doing this project.
So,
if you can kind of see this is one page of what we had to start with. And if you notice, there's no margins. It's right out to the edges. And down here at the bottom, I don't know if you can tell, on many pages, there would be a line missing at the bottom, or you'd see half of a line that you could just barely discern, you could barely make out. So this is a copy of a copy of a copy. This is, as far as I can tell, the history of this, it's a third generation reproduction. And it would have been photographed, it would have been, the original book, as again, I have not seen an original book, but I was told that the original was actually 8.5 by 11. And this is 6 by 10, or no, 6 by 9. So it kept getting reduced and reduced and reduced until it was barely readable. So what we did was to scan it. We came up with this, and here's the way this one looks inside, if you can see that. Yeah.
So in the other version, you didn't have it like as well organized as to who was speaking and things like that.
Yeah, it's completely reset. We scanned it, edited it several times. I edited it. Barb edited it, and then I learned enough about page design, and we bought a package from Adobe called InDesign, and learned how to use that well enough, at least, to put this book together. So the type style is large enough so that my somewhat less than youthful eyes can read it. And I've added, oh gosh, I don't remember now, several hundred footnotes at the bottom of the pages correcting some of what I believe to be the worst errors. We didn't change the original text at all. The original text is as it appears in the original book. I didn't feel that it was appropriate to make any corrections other than spelling corrections, and filling in words that were missing. At the bottom of the page, you'd have sometimes like a half of a sentence and it wasn't there. So I had to kind of guess, give it my best shot as to what might have been there. And then I did a new chapter on soundboard function, because there's a lot of misinformation there about how soundboards work. The authors go into a great deal of detail about this vibrating disc that's found in the cell of the wood, the wall of the wood cell in the tree, and how that amplifies the sound. And there's just a lot of stuff that we know better now. We don't believe that stuff anymore.
Yeah, there is something, and I think that's interesting for you to call out too, because it's sort of like it's like a reference point of a piece in history of the piano industry.
It's definitely a piece of history, and I appreciate it as much as a piece of history. It talks about certain woods that are not going to be available because they come from the warring countries. Oh, what warring countries? Well, what was going on in 1916? They were looking forward to the time when the war was over, because all of these other countries, their manufacturing facilities were being destroyed, and America was going to be the only industrial nation on earth that was going to be able to supply the world's needs for pianos. They were looking forward to the day at the time in some of these cities where piano factories are located, water was somewhat dangerous to drink. So workers would be drinking beer on the job. Well, that was okay in the morning, but by afternoon, some of the work got a little strange. And several of the management people who talked were looking forward to the ultimate solution that was going to solve that. That was prohibition. And that was going to solve all of their problems. And so, it's interesting to me to get that historical perspective of what was going on in these factories at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's a couple of tone building.
Yeah, definitely interesting. And it's interesting just to have a more detailed commentary on, how it came to be and what you find the purpose and utility of it. Because it is, I remember picking it up, but I wasn't sure exactly the book I was getting. And like you said, you're reading some things and you're like, well, these people don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So what is this a
but
useful
for a
research?
long time, we weren't aware of that. For a long time, we thought this was gospel truth. This was how pianos work. It talks about sound traveling in different ways that we look at it now. No, not really. So anyway,
Yeah.
but I found it to be both a fascinating project and I hope a worthwhile one, because it put the book into readable form again.
Totally. And it reminds me, just in interacting with various, piano techs who have been steeped in parts of the piano building process for a while. These instruments, my understanding is we kind of imagine that, somebody sat down and they drew this perfect plan of exactly what it's going to be. And that plan was kind of passed down from generation to generation. Everything had a reason that was very solid. And I think the more that you explore the history of piano building and the design and construction, there are a lot of things are just there because they were there the last time. And, maybe it's kind of like that old story of the ham, why do we cut the ends off of the ham, grandma,
Right.
that's
Well,
tradition,
that
well,
was
it fit
that
in the
was
pan.
how long the pan was. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a good point, because a lot of what you read there, you'll find there are some people who are really struggling to bring the piano industry out of this strictly empirical trial and error approach to building. We look at these pianos now, and I read this constantly about somebody will say something like, well, that piano was designed to have this particular scaling, to be tuned at 4/4. No, they really weren't. The design was basically empirical. It talks about one bass string winder, where I think it's Morton, who's he's the moderator through a lot of this. He goes in to visit the string winder, and there's all these broken strings sitting around. And, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm trying to get a set of bass strings that will work with what this manufacturer has sent to me. Well, why don't you just tell the manufacturer to, make a usable scale? Oh, I can't do that. He says, yeah, if I do that, they'll just go someplace else and get strings. So what he's doing is he's not designing strings for tone. He's designing strings that will fit a very badly designed bass section and not break. So this is not exactly what we think of when we think of early piano builders doing this wonderfully subtle, gorgeous design work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating, the whole process, and also just things that I've heard about, piano design details, numbers, measurements, things being written on the walls of factories, and somebody coming in to repaint, and people going, no, don't paint that wall, because that's the place where we're storing the information that we need, to build these pianos. And it just makes you think of a little bit more delicate and a little bit less intentional around some of these aspects.
It was very empirical. Now, I say these things, but bearing in mind, these were some very, very smart people doing this, and they would listen carefully, and they would think, and they would evaluate. So yes, it was empirical, but the better of them, they developed, they came closer to reality than others did. And you can tell when you service these pianos, God, this thing was just thrown together, or this one really had some thought put into it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a grab bag.
Cool. Well, I'll go back to some of these other questions. They came to me privately, so we haven't seen them in the chat. You haven't seen them yet. Jim Kelly asked, "Can Dell talk about the alternate sized keyboards?" He thinks you were involved in some of the research around them. Hylun offers them, but wondering if Yamaha and others may. Any awareness around that?
Well, my research, to the extent of I've drawn some head scales that there is a group, pianists something for alternate sides keyboards, PASK, I think it is, and they have a presence on Facebook. I would guess if you just go on there and type in PASK, you'll find a lot of information about that. It turns out that there really is no international standard for the width of the keyboard. I had done some studies back at Baldwin. I looked through a lot of their archival information, and I found reference to a so-called international standard that was established in the late 40s, I think it was. It was supposed to be 1,220 millimeters. which is just a little bit more than 48 inches. So when I was designing the small Baldwin Grand, I very carefully laid out the head scale to this so-called international design. And when I turned the design in, they sent it to the key makers down in Juarez, and Juarez sent it back. Said, we can't do this. Well, what do you mean? Well, that's not what we built. Oh, yeah, that was dumb on my part because I didn't check to see what they were building. I just went by what was supposed to be the international standard. And it turns out that just about every company that makes keys makes them a little bit differently. They're not all the same width. Ironically, at the time, and this was in the later 80s, I found that Yamaha was probably the widest head scale available, which I thought was somewhat ironic since Asian people generally have smaller hands. Uh, uh, I wanted a little easier for them to play. You thought I had
Make sure we get folks in, because I'll let you in a
of students, young students, or parents of young students. Uh, they're going to have smaller hands, so let's make the piano a little easier for them to play. You thought I had suggested eliminating apple pie. It was just everybody was horrified because you couldn't do that. You grow up playing on this small one. You that would hinder you later when you had to transition to a standard size keyboard, which I don't think that has gotten through the violin makers yet because they persist in making smaller violins for smaller children. And amazingly, these children somehow manage to adapt as they grow up and get bigger and go to bigger instruments. Um, anyway, yeah, there is. They have come up with three sizes, which, if memory serves, the smallest one is 5.5 inches for one octave, and that's center to center, for example, C to C. 5.5 inches, 6 inches, and 6.5 inches. And there's a company in Philadelphia, I think it is, that has actually made a number of these head scale or these key sets for different pianos. Very, very expensive, and the smaller ones especially are very problematic in fitting to existing pianos. So I looked into it and I wrote some stuff about this. In fact, I wrote something about it in the journal a couple of years ago. That if we really want to do this, we're going to have to redesign our pianos somewhat, because you have to get what's called the strike line, which is the distance from the center point of A1 to the center point of C88. You have to get that reduced. It varies in different pianos depending on all kinds of complicated interactive components like the string angles and center to center spacing of the action components along the key rail. But the wider that strike line is, the more difficult it becomes to get down to some of these smaller key head scales. And ironically, what I introduced, the ideas I introduced in the articles I was writing was, if we want this, what we're going to need to do is go back to flat strung grands, because you can design a flat strung piano with a strike line that is, or scale stick that is perfect. I mean, it's very easy to do. And that, of course, brings up a whole other, well, we can't have flat strung pianos because, well, all the perceived reasons, almost none of which make any real sense.
Yeah, that's the type of thinking I was talking about up front. And also, I mean, just the example that you gave about violins, right? I mean, I think for me, that wouldn't have came immediately to mind, but it's so obvious when you say something like that, right? Like that didn't seem to stop the violin makers from making smaller violins. Yeah. So,
well, the people who actually play on these pianos daily, when they do get to a concert hall and they have to perform on a piano with a full-size keyboard, they say, yes, it does take a little bit of getting used to again, right, but they pretty much have it down in half an hour. So it's not a real big issue. And since most people perform on one piano over and over in their own homes, that's really a non-issue. And it is something I think that piano makers need to address. It really does. There's a lot of hand injuries are the result of people playing on key head scales that force their fingers to do things that our fingers aren't designed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Next question, I'll head back to, what is this? Jim Kelly said, also any comments about other materials that could be substituted for felt? He thought he had heard about something like a rubber that could be substituted for felt. Have you heard of this?
Yes, every time I've seen it happen, or I've seen it tried, I've also seen it fail. Rubber falls apart. It does all kinds of weird things that you don't expect felt to do. I doubt we're going to come up with any practical solution for wool felt anytime soon for the piano. Manufacturers would love to, because good wool felt is expensive, but it has properties that so far synthetics have not matched. I know of several manufacturers who have tried to reduce the cost of hammer felt by using blends, and it just doesn't work very well. The blends don't have the interlocking capabilities of the wool fibers, and they break down faster. They don't sound.
The wool has a springiness to it that is particularly
well. It does, and it
useful,
also has,
right?
It also has scales that interlock, and which is what happens during the felting process. It's the wool fibers are pounded together, and they twist and they interlock and they grab each other and they hold together. which gives it both body and resilience. And you can carry that to extremes. I looked at some felt at the Bacon Company that was, you could practically drive nails with it. Stuff, it was so hard. I've forgotten what the application was. It was used for some kind of a bearing material in a ship's drivetrain, I think. I don't remember for sure. But yeah, I don't think we're going to find a viable solution. You know, manufacturers that keep trying to do this kind of stuff, like less expensive pedal systems, trap work systems. Oh, well, let's just put a rubber bushing in there. And then, 5 years later, the technician is trying to figure out, well, how do I replace that plastic part that broke? And it's not really something I can just replace with leather or felt. So, yeah, yes, it saves the manufacturer a couple of pennies early on, but is it worth it? I don't think so. Same thing with leather, except leather, there is a material that's being made called Xane that does pretty good in replacing certain leather components. For example, hammer knuckles, back checks. And that material seems to be working pretty well.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, during the conventions that we've had, it's been fascinating to see some of the people that come in, and just there's so much to be said about wool in the piano manufacturing process. We had David Stanwood come in and talk quite a bit about wool. Of course, his wife does felt work as well, so he has a particularly unique perspective on wool. And then we had Alex Kirsten from Signgraver also just talk about pretty in depth about how they think about wool and what an important role it plays in the process of creating their instruments. I mean, that's for hammers. Of course,
I don't think that's going to be replaced anytime soon.
Right. Let's see here. What else do we have here in the chat? And it was this sort of, somebody said, acknowledging maybe it's a stupid question. I think I know the answer. The hybrid scale, means using more than one type of wire, sort of.
Yeah, it's in Palello's case, I think he has 4, maybe 5. He also, incidentally, and this is something to keep in mind if you're servicing a Steinway Model S, which has a treble section that's designed to break just about any wire known. The speaking length in those pianos is simply too high, which means that the tension is also too high. And Palello makes one wire which is particularly high tensile, has a particularly high tensile strength, which I am told will stand up in that scale. So it would be certainly worth a try. It's less expensive than replacing the bridge anyway. But yeah, he has one, a type M, I think, is modern or fairly normal, is pretty much like Roslau or Mapes IG wire. And then there's a type 0, type 1, and a type 2, I think are the 3. The type 2, is something that you're not going to use much in modern pianos, but it's quite useful in early pianofortes. But the type 0 and type 1 are more commonly used. The type 1 being the lower of those two. So yeah, and personally, I have used them primarily in tenor sections and in the chords of certain bass strings. So I don't keep the smaller wires in stock, but I do keep the larger ones that you would find typically used in a tenor section of the piano.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So we have a question from Jeannie Grassi. She says, can you talk about what sorts of things to listen for when evaluating soundboards? For example, beyond measuring for crown or downbearing, what does a good soundboard sound like?
Well, it sounds like it makes good music. That wasn't the answer you were looking for, was it? Well, okay, think about it. What happens when a soundboard quote goes bad? And I go into this quite a bit in the first half of the book that I'm putting together. Why do we measure crown? What's the point? Well, we measure crown because crown has to be there for the piano to sound good. Why? What is it about crown in a soundboard that makes that soundboard sound any different than a soundboard over here that doesn't have crown? Well, what it does is it's a way to add stiffness to the soundboard without adding weight, mass to the soundboard. So what does that mean? Well, you put the board together, and if you simply glued the assembly together flat ribs, room temperature, soundboards at room temperature, glue it together, no crown at all. You support it on the parameter, you put a weight in the middle, and you measure the deflection. Well, so deflects, pick a number, 5 millimeters. Now, you take the same wood panel, you dry it out, and you glue it to flat ribs. Now take it out in the shop, and you let that soundboard absorb some moisture. It's going to try to expand, but it's glued to the ribs, so it can't really expand too much. What it's going to do is going to force a curve into that assembly. Now you take it back to your same little fixture, you support it, you put the same weight in the middle of it, and you measure the deflection. It's not going to be 5 millimeters, it might be 2 or 2.5 or 3. It'll be less. So what does that tell us? It tells it, and I sample this, and I built up some samples, and I measured deflection on one of them when it's oven dry, and then I let it take on moisture and measure deflection again. And the deflection is significantly different. So what we've done is we've made it stiffer. Now, what does that have to do with music? Well, when the string vibrates, there's energy that is transferred from the vibrating string down through the bridge and into the soundboard assembly. So that vibrating energy causes a soundboard to physically move. How much does it move? Well, how much does it weigh, and how stiff is it? Oh, we're back to stiffness again. So putting crown in a soundboard has nothing to do with changing its mass or its weight, but it has some to do with changing its stiffness. So what happens when you lose stiffness? Well, energy is going to be transferred from the strings into the soundboard at a different rate. It's going to be transferred faster. Well, what part of the soundboards, what part of the musical spectrum is going to be transferred? It turns out that in the treble section, it's a less stiff soundboard will absorb high frequency energy more quickly in a less stiff soundboard. So over time, as soundboard stiffness decreases, which it always does with a compression crown soundboard, due to several factors, wood creep, long-term creep. That's when we're measuring soundboard crown, what you're really measuring is the effect of long-term creep or compression set, if you will. So as the wood fibers change physically because of compression set, that means that the internal compression in the panel is decreasing, and the soundboard is becoming less stiff. So the high frequency energy in the strings is going to be dissipated at a faster rate. What does that mean in terms of tone? It means that in the upper area, roughly the top third of the piano, which is where it's most noticeable, the sound is going to become somewhat more percussive. And the sustain of the sound will become less. Since most pianos have somewhat problematic designs in the treble section anyway, they're just kind of already hanging on by the skin of their little teeth. Anything that happens up there that's going to cause energy to be drained off more quickly is going to significantly affect how the piano sounds. So the sound gets increasingly percussive. You have that bright, sharp attack sound, and it dies out very quickly. You can make this somewhat less bad by changing the characteristics of the hammer, which are almost always heavier than they should be at least in the upper part of the scale. So you can fuss around with it that way, but if the piano has lost crown, and I really don't like to use the phrasing lost crown, because what we're really talking about, if it's lost stiffness, then and I say that because I have come across too many pianos that have no crown whatsoever, but function quite nicely as musical soundboards. So it's not just a matter of not just a matter of crown. It's a combination of factors. But that will be the acoustical warning sign that the soundboard is going south. It's going bad. And historically, there has been almost nothing that can be done. Once it's gone, it's gone. You send the piano someplace and have the soundboard replaced. The process, and we talked about this in an earlier session, of treating it with epoxy in certain ways, will help considerably. Not by restoring crown, it does not do that, but it does restore stiffness.
Yeah, and it works surprisingly well. And quite a few people have said they tried it and really appreciated the technique. Let's see here. Let's try to fit in a question or two more, and then we'll sign out. We got about 7 minutes left in the hour. Bruce Gibson had a question that you may or may not have an answer to. He works on a lot of upright pianos from the early 1900s with loose center pins. Very few customers in the area want to pay for complete repinning. Do you know, that's not surprising. Do you know of a liquid solution that would tighten center pin bushings?
I do not.
If you want them super tight, you could try super glue, but I don't know.
No, I don't. I presumably there are some aren't some of the supply companies selling something like Profelt, or I have no idea if those work or not. I've not tried them. I'm particularly leery of chemicals in piano actions. One of my early experiences with that was there was a new lubricant put on the market. It's called I think it was LPS3 or something like that, and it was promoted at one of our by somebody at one of our conventions. This was just the greatest thing ever, and he demonstrated it. And wow, bunch of tight flanges, loosen them. That was great. So we tried that on a piano, and it was wonderful. And about 9 months or a year later, the client called back and said, "Oh, the pianos are getting really hard to play, and some of the notes don't repeat themselves." I went out there and looked at it, and that action had locked up tight. So I ended up buying a new set of hammer shanks for that piano, and I have never forgotten that little experience. That was at my expense, not theirs, because it was my fault. I put the stuff on there. So I'm very cautious when it comes to putting chemicals on actions. I'll let other people do the experimenting. But no, the short answer is I really don't.
So there's a question in here, which I know we're not going to have enough time to cover the details, and I had something I wanted to quickly bring in for the last minute or two. But I'll state the question, and maybe we leave it for the next time. It's a appropriate question for you from Sky Meadows. Are there other materials being considered for soundboards and cases? She knows some wood parts are being replaced with carbon fiber. Maybe just in, this is kind of a silly request. Just in a minute or two, maybe an overview of things that you've seen on that.
I don't answer anything in a minute or two.
I know.
Yes, there are. It's also something I've done some experimenting on, and didn't I do a class on that? We talked about alternate soundboard materials.
Yes, definitely. We have a master class on that as well.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested, so we've mentioned a couple master classes today. I don't know if I'll have time to dig up the links for them, but if you're interested in master class on resurrecting the piano soundboard with epoxy, we have that with Dell.
Yeah.
We also have one where he talks about updating materials for soundboard, kind of the latest research that he's doing and things that he's seeing, and he talks about that. Richard
Dane in England has done a fair amount of research with carbon fiber, and some of that has appeared in Steingraber pianos. Personally, I'm skeptical of carbon fiber. It's a great material for a lot of things, but I'll tell you, that stuff rings like a bell. It has no internal damping, or very, very low internal damping qualities, whereas wood is much higher. It dampens out fairly effectively. What we're trying to do is dampen out a lot of the very ugly high partial stuff that otherwise we just really don't like to hear. But there are other materials, and there's other ways to treat it. You can face carbon fiber with wood veneers, for example, which to help dampen it out. But there are also other fibers that can be used. I've experimented with flax fiber, for example. I think that some probably hemp fibers might be usable at some point if we can never get over our reluctance to grow the stuff. You say, yes, I think that the advantages of other fibers being used other than wood fibers, I think that ultimately we're going to have to, if we're going to continue building good pianos. And I say that because we are rapidly running out of anything resembling good musical grade spruce. Some of the spruce I've seen in pianos over the past few years is not as good as the shipping cartons that we used to get from Posey back when I started putting soundboards in the 70s. So when I was back in those days, vertical grain was considered anything about 20 to 30 degrees off of 90 off the vertical. Gosh, I'm seeing stuff now that's more than 45 degrees off. Well, that's not really vertical grain anymore. Now we're getting to flat sawn lumber. Where does this end? I think an interim step is a good grade laminated board, but even that that's an intermediate step. So yeah, I think it's something that, first of all, we have to get over our prejudices against it, but then we have to start doing some serious work on actually getting in there and trying it. And the reason I'm not doing that is because it's not inexpensive.
Right.
And I haven't found a wealthy sponsor.
All right. Well, any of us wealthy sponsors out here, contact Del if you want to be his patron. The muse of Del Fandrick. You got a little competition, Barbara, but she's probably already contributed all the money that she can to his cookie projects.
Hey, nothing I have done would have been possible without that woman. So she's a keeper.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Barbara's on the call today. Hello, Barbara. Good to have you here. Um, yeah, so we're, of course, as always, you've got a lot of great stuff to share, and we appreciate all that. We're going to have to sign off here in a minute. So I'll wrap things up. But if anybody has questions or wants to follow up, you can email us, and we can get conversations started about various things. I tried to put some links in the chat. Actually, we did find some links to some of the classes that we mentioned here that Dell has taught for piano technicians master classes. If you want to copy the chat, I'll explain it really quickly. In the lower left right-hand corner of the chat, there's a 3 dots in a little square. If you click on that and hit save chat, it will save the chat to your computer. And then after it says it's saving it, there's actually a link that appears for maybe 5 seconds that tells you how to get to the folder where it saved it. But generally it's your documents folder in I think it's in documents folder in a Zoom. That having been said, I'll try to have our follow-up email that comes after the session include some of that information. And I'll keep everybody on for just one more minute because I wanted to share a few things. And again, we'll share this in an email, but I think some of you probably have noticed, or all of you probably noticed, that David Anderson has not been with us for the past few weeks. For those that didn't explicitly understand, he was battling cancer for several months of the past year. He actually was in remission for that, but recently he's having some issues, medical issues, that they're not quite sure what's going on. Some issues with his brain, so they're trying to figure out what's going on. So he's kind of just been really taking it easy for the time being. But I wanted to include some information. We have permission to share this. I put his wife's contact information in the chat if anybody wants to reach out. Her name's Tanya Regier, Tanya at tanyaregier.com. Her phone, she said it's okay to share her phone number. I put that in the chat. And then there's a link in the chat where it's a website where they were sharing information during his battle with cancer. So they've just left that up to share if anybody wants updates with how he's doing at the moment. So we'll put that information in the email, but I just wanted to, just take a moment to say, of course, we'll all miss David Anderson. I haven't gone into a lot of detail about what he's been up to. Just want to keep people informed, and go ahead if you're inclined, take a minute to find a way to let them know that you're thinking about him. So he can get through the next phase of things. They're hoping to figure out what's going on and tackle it in the next few weeks. All right. So thank you all so much for joining. And again, thank you, Dell. I'm actually going to stay on this Zoom with Pooja, who's helping with the project, for a minute to ask her to request something of her, so we can all just sign off for now, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much. If there's nothing else, we'll catch you later. Enjoy the summer weather.